quickly. My name is Michael Hauk. If we haven't met before, I'm one of the partners and founders at CongruentX. And we are a Microsoft partner. We focus on revenue operations. So if you think about marketing, sales, customer service, customer experience, primarily within the Microsoft ecosystem. Technically, we are partners with Salesforce and HubSpot as well, but we find ourselves spending more time in Microsoft with that stack because that's where we came from, and we have a lot of long-term relationships. Which leads me to why I asked Bailey to join this morning. I can't say that I've known Bailey for 20 years because he's not really that old. I mean, but I've known Bailey's organization literally for 20 years at this point. I was a customer, end customer for probably 7 or 8 of those years, and then moved into the partner channel, and I've been partnering with them ever since. And Bailey, I'll ask you to do an introduction of yourself quickly, and then we'll come back to a little bit more about your firm and kind of why I asked you to join this morning.
Yeah. So as Mike mentioned, my name is Bailey Moss. I'm the director of sales here for the Americas. MSCRM add-ons, our name kind of lends to how old we are. So we have been in this space. In fact, we celebrate our 25th anniversary. So it actually predates Microsoft CRM, but then back in 2005, we went fully into when it was still called Microsoft CRM space. I think the first usable version of the product I'm going to show was like CRM 1.2. Is when it was available. So we've been around for quite a while. Our kind of claim to fame is, we're not a standard Microsoft partner, but we are given the partner status by Microsoft because of our relationship, because of our number of clients. But we are an all in-house dev team, all in-house support team, everything. So Michael say we consider ourselves small but mighty in terms of our support capability. But yeah, our real goal is to bring additional capabilities to what is now the Power Platform. Previously Microsoft CRM to Dynamics, Dataverse, but now it's really the core. The core is Power Platform. So we want to add things like document generation, storage reduction, UI enhancements. It's really always looking out for those gaps in functionality.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So what had happened? Like I said, I've known these guys for a long time, and it's really there's kind of 2 things that in our minds led to this webinar, and that is, as I said, we're on the services side, and so we can't have a conversation either with an existing client or with a prospect that doesn't involve AI these days. But we're on the services side, whereas Bailey's organization, we call them ISVs, right? Independent software vendor, third party, Microsoft partner, whatever you want to call it, right? But they make products, and so I just kind of wanted to have a conversation about the differences and the impact of AI and really the philosophy around AI from a services firm versus a product development firm. And secondarily, what really triggered it was, I don't know, probably a month and a half ago at this point, I've lost track of time. One of Bailey's colleagues did a webinar where he actually showed some AI functionality that MSCRM add-ons had already built into one of their, what I call core products. Probably, if not one of the probably 2 or 3 most used products, most adopted products that they have. And so that got us thinking about it and talking about it. And we said, you know what, let's have a conversation and really come at it from 2 perspectives. One is, for MSCRM add-ons, for Bailey to talk about what they have done, what they're seeing, what they're hearing from their customers around AI and product enhancements, and anything he can share from a roadmap perspective, things that they've done, that they've seen done with their product and everything else. And I'll kind of pile on a little bit in terms of some of the things that we've seen. And then if we pull that back to, if you look at the topic of the webinar, right? It says, we're changing our products to embrace AI. That's the MSCRM add-ons. It says, are you changing your processes to embrace it, right? Obviously, when people think about AI, everybody thinks about efficiency, and hopefully, usually, sooner or later, they start to talk about effectiveness. And so really what we're trying to tie together is if you look at the products and the way products are evolving, and we're using MSCRM as the example today, but it could be products that Microsoft is building and modifying and everything else. What is that kind of, I don't want to say forcing, because I don't think it's necessarily pushing. I think it's by choice, right? But what is that causing organizations to think about and look at to where they can change the way that they're doing things currently because the technology is removing barriers that used to exist or making things faster, easier, better? Make sense? All right, so unless anybody has any questions before we dive in, I'm going to ask Bailey to kind of go through. He's just spent a few minutes putting some things together to show you, again, it's not prescriptive. It's not, these are just examples of things that he and his team have either done or seen done with some of their products to just kind of get that in the back of everybody's mind as a talking point as we talk about the process side of this.
Yeah, and Mike, you're absolutely correct with this is our flagship. So Documents Core Pack is really our largest solution. It's we have really two core products, but this is really our number one and what we are constantly updating, constantly adding features. And one thing I'd like to preface is we aren't trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to any AI functionalities that Microsoft's producing. We want to make sure that we're interacting with it properly, so that we're not being left behind. Because who wants to support, especially an ISV, who wants to support their own, LLM or, when it comes to governance, security, everything. So with all of our features, we're really trying to use as much Microsoft features as there are. We are just kind of this core piece of what is really document generation. So, but yeah, if you'd like, Mike, I can go ahead and share my screen, or I can kind of walk through our kind of view on everything and what we've heard from Microsoft and the industry.
I think let's do the screen share first, and then we'll come back to kind of philosophy, if you will.
Yeah, in that case, this is, no PowerPoint. This is real environment. So forgive me if it's, my environment could be a bit slow sometimes.
It's not a production environment. Yeah. It's not, yeah.
It's a sandbox. So
exactly.
Documents Core Pack, just to give you a high level, it's an end-to-end document solution. So it's from template. So we have a template designer to deliver document. But what we're talking about today is kind of the evolution of that process. So I'm going to start where I'd say 99% of our customers use our product, which is a model-driven app and a dialogue. And it's our dialogue, but so I'm going to walk through, I'll keep this very quick, but say this is a quote and say I want to send a quote. I'll hit create document here. This is our dialogue. Already this is better than most of the requirements I see coming in. It's a lot of people are still copy and pasting, believe it or not, or using a third party outside of Dataverse, outside of Dynamics. But in my case, I'll just hit, US generate and send quote. And what that's doing in the background is it's generating two documents. One is pulling in quote data, generating it as a PDF. One is generating as email content. And then if I didn't have this in a demo environment as a production, I would have it send automatically. But in this case, it's just going to pop up a draft email and have everything filled out for me. And you can see what I meant because this should be like sub 3 seconds is how this should generate here. But essentially in this process, what I'm going to walk through is each kind of iteration of how this can be used and how Microsoft has even changed with it. So this was dialogue model-driven app. You can see the from to is everything is defined. So I just clicked a button. It says from, who's it from, who's it going to, the subject, which is actually dynamic. So it's based off data. The email body is a template as well. So it's fully dynamic. And then my attachment. And that's really the core product is we build out documents. We make it very easy to maintain, build documents. But the reason we consider it end to end is because then how's it delivered? So that's kind of our starting point. Next would be the next iteration, really what Microsoft was pushing when I joined. When I joined, it was CRM 2016, and everyone was doing workflows. In fact, I was one of those who was kind of slow to adopt Power Automate, but now, so this is kind of the next, I guess around 2018 when it was renamed from Flow to Power Automate because it matched Salesforce. But this is that exact same step using our connector. So this is an update of the solution, an additional feature, our Power Platform connector. And this is running through the exact same steps as I showed, but using a Dataverse trigger. So it's saying as soon as that, instead of user clicking a button, this is as soon as the record's created. So as soon as it's set to active, it's running through those same steps, generating the same items. And you can see these are our actions, very friendly to use. But yeah, essentially just one less interaction. The next is the transition from Microsoft desktop to Microsoft mobile apps. So as you know, Canvas apps, really that citizen developer, low code, no code approach. So you can use our same connector. So let's ignore it. In fact, we've added a few companies recently who don't have a model driven app except for settings. They're actually just using it as a Dataverse instance. So this is an example of it pulling a document. So if I went here, this is technically a Dataverse record in the background, this donation record. But once again, it's calling the document core pack Documents Core Pack connector. It's generating a document off of that. And this should actually save to SharePoint and show me a preview as well as soon as that's created. So you can see this is the dynamic document. It's pulling from their contact information, their donation, and pulling in data. So really it's wherever you want to build document or wherever you want to have documents either be able to be surfaced, something like a Power Page, which I'm not showing today, but you can use it the same way. Or if it's your emailing or in person delivering a document, e-signature, anything like that. The final, which is kind of was the tipping point for today's conversation, like Mike mentioned, we did do a webinar. I think it was in March, I think it was March, end of March or either early April. But is the ability to use that same function, kind of following what Microsoft is doing. I think Satya said he didn't say SaaS is dead. He said it was taken a little out of context, but I think he said they're going away in favor of agents, so that the UI is going to be agents, an agentic approach in the future. So we kind of worked around that using our connectors. So if I said something like, instead of using a dialogue, a flow, or a Canvas app, if I just said create invoice, this is calling our connector again. The only difference here than a standard Copilot, it's built in Copilot Studio, is it is calling a flow. So it is using Power Automate still, but you can see there it's generated my document. So that's my only interaction. I could have that generate and send as an invoice. Send as an email. I could have it send through e-signature. I could, save it as a note. Really, of course, Power Automate for post-processing is kind of Pandora's box when it comes to functionality. I mean that in a positive way. But if I open that up, it generated it and it saved a SharePoint for me automatically. And here's that, a little bit different. Funny enough, I did use AI to generate these product images. So that's why they look a little strange. But yeah, so really that's kind of where we're headed, I'd say, from a high level, but is starting from that dialogue approach, which I'd say still 99% of people are using. And I'm happy to get more into why that is, but then getting from automated into an agentic approach, which is probably the misuse of the word agentic, but I've heard it so much recently, it's like I can't get it out of my head. But yeah, that's pretty much it from like the real world, what it looks like, how it's used. At least tip of the iceberg, I should say.
Thanks, Bailey. So before we dive into a little bit more of kind of corporate philosophy and roadmap, I'll just ask, does anybody have any questions based on what Bailey showed?
Yeah,
Chris,
so
go ahead.
The AI piece of this is the chat part, right?
Yep. Yeah, and
Right.
we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But I do, if you have other questions, by all means, please go ahead. And if anybody else has a question, either raise your hand, come off mute, whatever you're comfortable with, type it in the chat. Doesn't matter. Tasha's watching the chat in case something pops in. But just kind of use that as a backdrop for kind of where we came from and where we are. And so now if we think a little bit more about where we're going, as Bailey already said, right, obviously as a Microsoft partner, it's in their best interest. Microsoft's R&D budget is way bigger than MSCRM add-ons as a company, right? So why reinvent the wheel? Why start from scratch? Why not take what they're doing and leverage that and weave that into the products? So Bailey, if you can elaborate a little bit more kind of on the organizational philosophy moving forward, and like I said, anything that you can share. I know sometimes roadmaps are A, in flux, and B, some things we don't want to share until it's time to share. But anything that you can share today about the roadmap or kind of where things are going, I think would be useful.
Yeah, and you're right, because sometimes, especially sales, things are kept on purpose. They're gatekept from us because we have a habit as salesmen of talking too much, or saleswomen, because that's kind of our I guess our skill is to talk. Not that that's one of mine, but really our kind of goal is anyone who builds agents, using Microsoft or any other solutions. Our goal is to be able to allow them to utilize our document generation. Whether that's Dataverse using the Copilot for sales, or whether you're in Teams. Like, say, if I want to send an invoice, I don't want to have to then leave Teams and generate it. So really, our approach is, I don't want to say to become an AI company exactly, but to really interact as much as possible and make that interaction as smooth as possible. So an example of that being the Copilot that I showed, that request, that was calling, of course, it's very nice because you set up your triggers, but it learns from other triggers. So your trigger phrases, but it takes those and learns. But what it's doing is it was calling a flow. One thing we'll be releasing in terms of roadmap is a connector that you can call directly. So no need for the middle layer of Power Automate. You can just call the connector directly and set it up very easily. So that's one thing that'll actually be released end of Q3 of this year. And usually they don't even give me dates because I have a habit of saying, is that an internal date or is that an external date? But that's the expectation with that functionality. But overall, I mean, and if you want me to stop, Mike, I'm happy to stop before I go into categories.
Yeah, we won't dive in. Just I just saw the 10-minute pop up come in, right? And I want to make sure we kind of get through some things. But yeah, I think again, if I come back to kind of the genesis of certainly my exposure and for me MSCRM add-ons and as Bailey said, Documents Core Pack is kind of the core product, but they have lots of products. Another one that we see used often is the attachment extractor. And so what it really is when there's a consistent common problem with customers of Microsoft's where the solution that Microsoft produces doesn't give you a great answer, then MSCRM add-ons would come in and build a product, and they do that from time to time. And so if I think about that, and then I think about what Microsoft's doing, if I step away from MSCRM for a second and focus on Microsoft, right? What we're seeing more and more, first you saw it when they introduced Canvas apps or Power Apps, 7 or 8 years, however, maybe almost 10 years ago now, right? But it used to be model driven and people didn't like being locked into the UI and they wanted more flexibility. And now with the prevalence of AI in that chat interface that Bailey showed, we're starting to see more and more organizations consider UI to be maybe a little less important than it has been for years, and they just want to have that chat conversation. And so if I think about the purpose of MSCRM add-ons tools, the ability to basically just invoke them from the chat and tell them what you want it to do versus having to go in and click buttons and do it and everything else, to me dovetails pretty nicely with what Microsoft's trying to do, right? For years in a model-driven app, a user with just a little bit of training could go in and customize a view and say they wanted these columns in this order and they wanted to change the filter to this. And where we think it's going is they won't go in and modify the view. They'll tell the agent, they'll tell in the chat what they want the view to look like. These are the columns I want in the order that I want them. This is the filtering that I want, everything else, and it's just going to render the data for you, right? Instead of having 60 fields on a form and you scroll through the form to get them, you say, hey, can you show me this information for this record? And it's going to give it back to you, right? So when we think about the UI and that chat-based UI, I think that has a lot to do with kind of where we're seeing things evolve. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Go ahead, Bailey.
I was going to say, along with the chat side of that, also on the generative side, I can mention this on the roadmap as well, but I mentioned end-to-end with the template design, but our goal is also AI generated templates, not just building the Word document like you can today, but actually having a dynamic document, having your relationships built in automatically. I mean, our designer is very friendly already, but just to be able to say, hey, I want an invoice document, because as anyone who's not a designer like myself knows, it's much easier to start from a base that that our marketing or corporate design hands us, even if it doesn't have the fields already. But then I can tweak and then I can kind of know what I want, versus today where it's like, hey, give me a blank Word. I mean, I just was training someone on Documents Core Pack and I was like, create your first template, and it was it looked like something from the 90s with Times New Roman stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, so if we now kind of shift from the product piece for just a second and we think about the impact to people, right? For years, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Microsoft's CRM platform or Salesforce or HubSpot or anybody else, right? The holy grail has always been adoption, right? Especially when you talk about sales, I think. Right, salespeople, and if you follow us at all on our website, you see us talk about this all the time, right? They don't want to do CRM. It's like, what's the benefit of CRM to a salesperson? it's not putting data in the system. It's what the system can do for them, right? So whether that's reminders, which it's been able to do for years, but now it's a little bit better and a little bit more automated, and we're pivoting away from just, that granular data to AI being able to make a suggestion or recommendation. Maybe that's a cross-sell, upsell thing based on what's happening with other accounts. Maybe that's a relationship element of the organization and identifying that, hey, did you know so-and-so in our organization went to school with the CFO kind of thing, whatever it is. Now, instead of me having to ask the question or be very specific about what I'm trying to do, we're starting to get AI tools that can actually bring that to our attention. So if you think about those two things together, the question is, how does that impact your team? And what should you, as a leader of whether it's your organization or whether you're a consultant, right? What should you be talking to your customers about in terms of how people's jobs may change, how they can do things differently and leverage the tools or the technology in order to be not just more efficient, but more effective? Make sense? I'm going to stop there because we only have about 5 minutes left. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any experiences that anybody in the audience wants to share?
Well, I joined this call because I am very interested in, as the adoption and capabilities of AI increase exponentially.
Yeah.
What are the use cases that are really out there being implemented? And so the use case here, and tell me if I'm wrong, looks like using a conversation to execute operational commands, if you will, right?
Yep.
And being a CRM system, just food for thought, right? One of the fundamental powerful pieces of a CRM system is customer data.
Mm-hmm.
And sales information, right? So if you could use a dialogue type interface to ask questions like, why aren't some of my products and services being sold?
Mm-hmm.
Using customer feedback or whatever data you have to return some results. What's inhibiting my lowest performing sales staff? Things like that.
It's a great point, and it actually dives into, one of the most fundamental things, and it's a problem that's existed since the inception of CRMs. And I think AI has just kind of brought it back into visibility. Not the visibility ever went away, right? But in order to get good insights out of your CRM data, you have to have good data in CRM. And just like, if I've got bad data in CRM and I look at the data and I come to a conclusion based on the data and make a recommendation, AI just does that faster. And so if there's bad data in my system, it's making a bad recommendation. If there's good data in my system, it's making a good recommendation. I think right now, what we're actually seeing, and again, I'm just speaking for my firm and what we're dealing with, what we're seeing more focus on is how can I actually leverage AI to get better data in the system? And it goes back to the comment that I made earlier about, salespeople don't like to use CRM. And so if whether it's AI gleaning that information out of an email or out of a phone call, right? That's the Teams recordings in particular are the one area that we've seen just in 2 years how much better the AI summary of call recordings has gotten from when it first started, right? So as an example, taking that information and gaining insights or action points out of it, and that automatically getting created in the opportunity record as an example, right?
Yep.
Is a great way, to your point, Chris, to get good data in the system that now that same AI can sit on top of and make suggestions or recommendations or observations that, either a human isn't thinking about doing or would take a human a long time to sift through the data and come to that conclusion.
Or in my experience, they refuse to do it because it's too time consuming to properly enter an entire address.
Yeah.
Something like that, which is Something I've recently started using is just smart paste in the Power Platform. I mean, I love it. I love being able to take an address block and saying update this account that, smart paste it.
Yeah.
Something for the input. But yeah, you raise a huge point because this was actually during a session I asked that question, which was someone who actually just went through it and went through a massive data cleanup for almost a year and a half, just manual work. So it is interesting the amount of pre-work that it'll take, or starting with kind of a clean environment.
So
Yeah,
I know we're, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
Oh, that's a good perspective. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. So I know we're at time, and I want to be mindful of time. Obviously, if you have questions about MSCRM or their products or what they're doing, and maybe anything that Bailey doesn't want to share in an open platform, but he can share one-on-one, then by all means, feel free to reach out to Bailey. If you want to talk more about what we're seeing and doing at CongruentX, happy to have that conversation as well. Or if you have a specific question, whether it's now or as soon as we get off the call, that you didn't think to ask on the call, by all means, send it over, and we're happy to either jump on a call with you and have that conversation or send it over. There is no silver bullet. There's no one answer. The idea for this webinar was simply for us to have a conversation around both what we're seeing in terms of product evolution with AI, as well as, from a services side, from an organizational side, from a change management side, how AI is impacting the lives of people on teams and the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Hopefully it was
Thank
useful.
you.
Appreciate the time, the input. And like I said, if you have anything else for us, by all means, please reach out. Have a great day. Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank